Welcome back to Kings of the North. It's your official preview for the national championship game, a Northern National Championship game, Washington versus Michigan. Of course, Bill Landis would normally be here with me. He's a little under the weather. So we have Bill's pick at the end. I will make my pick at the end. But we're going to run through passing game versus pass defense, running game versus run defense on all sides of the ball, talk about some intangibles at the end, including the fact that both these teams must stop dropping punts. We might do a whole week of preview stuff on this, and it comes down to somebody drops a punt and somebody doesn't. So we will get to that at the end, but we are going to dive in on the stats of this, the matchup of this. And I will say off the top, which is not a surprise because these two teams won. I think these matchups for Washington and Michigan against each other in this Northern National Championship game are both significantly more difficult than what they faced in the semifinal. That's especially true for Washington going up against this Michigan defense as opposed to going up against a Texas defense that had absolute flaws in the pass defense, which is what Washington does best, throwing the ball. And I do think in a lot of ways, what Michigan showed defensively against Alabama, getting after Jalen Milroe, some decent percent of that, some function of that was just a quarterback who naturally holds the ball, was a first-year starter, and was just not ready for either edge guys and defensive tackles winning matchups and getting pressure, or Michigan blitzed Jalen Milroe more than half the time. And I don't think that's going to work against Michael Penix. So a lot of what we saw in the semifinals, which was Michigan and Washington doing what they do best, that's not going to work as well in the national title game, which is why it's a great matchup. We will start off with just some general numbers off the top. I'm here with my producer, Mike Urostowski. The numbers, when you look at like the overall efficiency numbers of Michigan and Washington and their ratings nationally, you have to remember, I think, two things. One is because like Michigan across the board is much higher than Washington is. And Mike, we can flip to those numbers. One thing is when you look overall, I looked at the FEI ratings and the SP Plus ratings. Overall ratings, Washington is 9th and 12th, which is like, hey, why is the 12th best team in the country playing the national title game? And it's, as we said, it's because computer numbers at this point are like a guide. It doesn't mean this is how you should pick a national championship game, right? Oh, they're only 12th. Michigan is second in the FEI and the SP Plus. And guess who's first in everything? Georgia dog mentality. So it's just a guide. We're not saying this should determine who wants computers. Nobody wants computers. It's interesting how much of a discussion we had around Michigan at the beginning of the year and schedule strength, and frankly, a lack of schedule strength. And then here we are. It didn't hurt them, right? It didn't. It's hard because there's the resume aspect of it, and there's the getting yourself ready for the season aspect of your non-conference schedule. And from either standpoint, it didn't hurt Michigan. They didn't play anybody, and here they are. So we look back at how much we talked about that. Didn't matter. Washington, huge lull in the middle of the season. We talked about that before the semifinal. A lot of that, I think, attributable to Jalen McMillan, one of their three best receivers, being out. And also maybe just a grind a little bit in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is a really good conference. The Big Ten is also a good conference, a little more top-heavy. Michigan's, I think, conference schedule, other than Ohio State and Penn State, was not as tough. But I think when you look at overall numbers like this, you have to think about the teams at their peak. And so I think both teams are at their peak. Michigan wound up playing half its regular season games without Jim Harbaugh as the head coach. But what they've done in the Big Ten championship game, and we'll include the Ohio State game when they didn't have Jim Harbaugh, but the way they ended the season and then in the semifinal, they're at a peak. And I think clearly, I mean, Washington threw for more than 400 yards a game in each of its first three games of the non-conference, but they're at a peak now. So overall, Washington 9th and 12th, Michigan 2nd and 7th offensively. And again, we're trying to compare here. Washington is 4th offensively in both the FEI and SP Plus ratings. Again, I think when Washington is rolling at their best, I think they're the best offense in the country. So numerically 4th and 4th, Michigan is 5th and 12th, which just tells you a little bit what Michigan does well. You know, this is still a good offense in a very different way than Washington is, but the Michigan offense is still good. And then defensively, when we look at the defensive numbers, Michigan's just significantly better. FEI and SP plus, Michigan statistically is maybe the best defense in the country. FEI has Michigan second. SP plus has them first. Washington is definitely a step down. 27th and 44th. And again, you're looking at how much they give up per game. Washington this year gave up 24 points a game. Michigan gave up 10. So some of that is stylistic, that there is a little bit of a time of possession thing that we can talk about a little bit, but also some of it is a reminder that the gap, I think, between the offenses is not as great. Washington's offense is better, but Michigan's is closer than what we talk about defensively, where Michigan has an excellent defense and Washington, maybe you can get something on. So we wanted to start off with that, but then we're going to dive into first as we do this pass game versus pass game, run game breakdown. Mike, we're going to start with the Washington pass game because I still think this is, well, I was going to say, I think this is where the game is decided. I'm actually not so sure about that. And I was going to save this idea and stat for the end, but I don't like teasing you guys and trying to get you to the end of the podcast by saving the good stuff. I want to give you the good stuff all the way through. I want to give you little nugs. I think what Ohio State gave Michigan, especially in 21 and 22 with CJ Stroud, I think is a great preparation for the Wolverines for what they're going to face in Michael Penix. I'm not sure you could find a quarterback in the last 3 years of college football that is a better comparison from Michael Penix than CJ Stroud. And I think that is from primarily a standpoint of he's a guy who's going to do his work from the pocket. He's not going to be a huge scrambler. We saw Penix's feet matter with 3 called runs against Texas that actually was very effective, and I do think that's going to have to happen again. But he's not going to make a lot of scramble plays with his feet. Can pinpoint accuracy from the pocket, able to slide in the pocket to stay away from trouble. And the point that I think we want to make here is that CJ Stroud kind of had his way with Michigan in 2021 and 2022, and Michigan won anyway. CJ Stroud in 2021 was 34 of 49 for 394 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks in 2021 in a 42-27 loss to Michigan. 2022, CJ Stroud is 31 of 48 for 349 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks in a 45-23 loss to Michigan. So they didn't stop CJ Stroud. So I wanted to start with the stats on the Washington passing attack versus the Michigan pass defense. But I don't know that it determines the game because I think it's possible that Michael Penix does kind of whatever he wants to do and Michigan wins anyway. And I think that comes down to 2 things. And I'm giving you all the good stuff right at the beginning. This is like my main takeaway. Hey, what did Doug say about the game? CJ Stroud prepped Michigan for Michael Penix. In 2021, Michigan won that game despite huge numbers from CJ Stroud by doing 2 things. One, Michigan ran the ball like crazy. They ran for 297 yards, averaged 7.2 yards per carry. They controlled the game on their side of the ball with their run game. And then they also sacked CJ Stroud 4 times. That's Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, right? So in key moments, they got after CJ Stroud. So yeah, they gave some stuff up, but they also did some damage when Ohio State dropped back to pass. So, okay, that's a formula maybe for Michigan in this game. Let Penix be Penix, but get a couple key sacks, stop some drives maybe by throwing them off rhythm, and then run the ball like crazy. That's a plan. In 2022, how did Michigan beat Ohio State despite a big statistical game from CJ Stroud? Is Michigan made huge plays in the pass game. So they hit 3 big passes early. JJ McCarthy wound up with about 80% of his passing yards on 4 throws in that Ohio State-Michigan game. And then they hit some big runs late when the Ohio State defense had come. But really, it was big plays. So Michigan was not in 2022, is not in 2023 a big play offense. But can you use that against your opponent? They don't expect it from you. And you hit them with a couple things, and all of a sudden, that's enough. So I think there's a way to combat a big Michael Penix game. But they also maybe have a chance. So that's my main thing. Michael Penix is the key, but if he's great, Michigan has proven they can beat a great quarterback anyway. This is the best passing offense in the country. Washington throws for 350 yards per game. That's first in the country. But Michigan only allows 150 pass yards a game. That's second best in the country. Michael Penix versus Texas, 430 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 29 of 38. So like those raw passing numbers, Michigan is so much more prepared to make things tough on Michael Penix than Texas was. I looked at the PFF coverage grades for all the cornerbacks that Washington has faced this year. The 3 highest rated corners in coverage that Washington has faced are the 3 Michigan corners. It's Mike Sanders-Still, Will Johnson, and Josh Wallace. They have not faced corners like this. Oregon State had a couple good safeties with good coverage grades, but in terms of matching up, nobody Washington has faced is more prepared to match up with Roma Dunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk than Michigan is. That is very real, and I think Michigan has a chance. So I just said they can beat Washington without stopping Penix. I think they have a chance to actually slow down this pass game to a decent degree. When you look at the overall pass defense grades on PFF among teams that Washington has faced, they've only faced Michigan is by far the highest graded pass defense that they will have faced this year. And the only other team that Washington faced that graded out as a top 50 pass defense was Oregon. They faced 4 pass defenses that were ranked in the hundreds. So they threw on people almost all year because they were facing some people who weren't prepared to stop it. Now, some of that stuff in the Pac-12 as well. There's a lot of teams in the Pac-12 that can throw. So then the pass defenses are graded lower. But like they beat Michigan State. It's kind of funny that Washington's going to play Michigan State in the non-conference and play Michigan in the national title game. Michigan State's pass defense ranked 132nd in the nation by the PFF grades I was looking at. Michigan is number 1, I think. So that matchup, I don't know that you stop Michigan, but I do think I don't think you stop Michael Penix in Washington. Michigan has a better chance to run with their receivers than anybody. Now, can they get after the passer? They blitzed Jalen Milroe more than half the time. And according to PFF, all their sacks came on their blitzes. They did get 19 pressures in that game. 8 pressures came from their edge rushers, 7 from their defensive tackles, 4 from their blitz guys. So some of it is you come with the blitz and then it's one of your defensive linemen who get home, but it's you overwhelm the offensive line with the numbers. So can Michigan do that to Michael Penix? Well, Michael Penix is pretty good against the blitz. He's been blitzed about, according to PFF, 35% of the time this year. Again, Michigan against Jalen Milroe blitzed him more than half the time. I don't think they can blitz Michael Penix more than half the time because his numbers against the blitz are about as good as they are when he's not blitzed. The completion percentage, now here's the thing. Everybody's numbers, when you look at PFF, all the quarterbacks, their numbers go down versus the blitz compared to not against the blitz. But you do open yourself up to more big plays, which is why people don't blitz every single play. But like the yards per attempt, the number of big time throws, the number of turnovers, all that's pretty similar for Michael Penix, blitz versus no blitz. And he throws more touchdowns against the blitz. So Michigan, I don't think can go crazy in this game the way they did against Jalen Milroe. And that was the number one. I mean, other than the Alabama center not being able to snap, the number one thing for the Michigan defense in that game was the way they blitzed and got pressure on Jalen Milroe. I don't think that's going to work. I do think this Jesse Minter matchup, and we talked about it in the show that Bill and I did earlier this week, previewing Michigan-Washington. We thought the Michael Penix matchup versus Michigan defensive coordinator Jesse Minter was the key to this game. And Michael Penix in the first interview this week talked about that, how Jesse Minter likes to give different looks and change the view for the quarterback pre-snap and post-snap. I think Jesse Minter has to make sure he doesn't try to do too much. So I think they will blitz significantly less. Most of the time in big games like this, blitzing about a third of the time makes sense. Against Kyle McCord this year, who is a far less accomplished quarterback than Michael Penix. But in the Ohio State game this year, Michigan blitzed Kyle McCord 26% of the time. They kind of let him sit back and do his thing, and they weren't that worried about it. Last year, Jesse Minter in 2022, his first year as the Michigan defensive coordinator, they blitzed C.J. Stroud 36% of the time. I would expect it to be about a third of the time against Michael Penix. I don't think you want to do more than that. And then the other part of this is Washington is so good in the explosives. They have 78 pass plays this year of 20 yards or more. That leads the nation. Texas has given up 46 pass plays of 20 yards or more. That ranks in the hundreds in the nation. That's not good. Michigan's given up 23. Michigan's given up half as many as Texas had. Passes of 20 yards or more. That's third best in the nation. So nobody has more explosive pass plays than Washington. Almost nobody gives up fewer explosive pass plays than Michigan, right? Washington, great at it. Michigan, great at stopping it. So there's just a lot here that it is going to be substantially more difficult for Washington to do its thing, but I still kind of think Washington's going to do its thing. I do not think you're going to stop Michael Penix. Whatever the over-under is for passing yards on Michael Penix, I think he'll throw for 300 yards in this game, because I think he'll throw for 300 either because he does his thing and Washington's winning, or they're behind and he has to. Because I don't think they're going to be able to run very much. And I don't know that they should try to run very much. So I do think the game starts here, which is why we started here. I don't think the game ends here, because I think Michigan has a path to slightly slow down, but not stop Michael Penix, but win anyway. If you think, I would love to hear, if you guys follow us on social media, you could follow us on Twitter at KOTNCFB. I'd be curious about your comparisons for Michael Penix in recent college football, but I just think C.J. Stroud is a great one, and Michigan beat him twice. And it's not like C.J. Stroud didn't lose that game. Even they had good third down conversion rates and stuff. There's some red zone stuff that we'll get into later. But if you have a different comparison for Michael Penix, I'd love to hear it on our Twitter account. But when we come back, we're gonna take a quick break. I got to reset myself, man. When I'm looking, you should see my notebook. I got to reset myself when there's no Landis. Sometimes when Landis talks, that's Dougie reset time. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about Washington running the ball against this Michigan run defense. That is a much shorter conversation. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. All right, Doug Lesmerises back on Kings of the North, flying solo on this one. We will have picks from me and from Bill Landis at the end of this show. And again, listen, I'm not trying to tell you anything. No, I am trying to. I'm trying to promote the show. We got it right in the semifinals. Bill and I said, I thought we broke down Alabama and Michigan the right way. We said Jalen Milroe was the key. We said he was going to hold the ball. He took 6 sacks. He was the key in a lot of ways. We said that comes down to the last drive. It goes to overtime. So we got that right. And our scores were right around the same in the 20s. Bill picked Alabama. I picked Michigan. It could have gone either way. And then Washington, Texas. We thought Texas would have a tough time stopping the Washington pass game. And we both picked Washington to win. And we were right in the right zone. So I think we had a handle on those two games. And this one I actually think is a little tougher to get a handle on, because I think there's more different ways it could go. Because I think it's actually it's a better matchup. There aren't as many. I really... The Texas pass defense and the Alabama uncertainty, boom bust nature at quarterback were two pretty gaping potential flaws. I thought those were the two biggest flaws in any of the 4 teams in the semifinal. And again, you can talk about the Washington defense, and we will, but a lot of the time it's a stylistic choice, and the Washington defense more often than not is just good enough, which we saw at the end when Texas is throwing passes in the end zone. It was just good enough. This matchup is there's more like prongs. There's more frontage roads where you're going down the highway. You're going down the highway, and you think you know how this game is going to go, but I think there's a couple more off ramps. And it's just hard to figure out which off ramp we're going to take. So we're going to talk about the Washington run game against the Michigan run defense. And this is all about the Michigan run defense because it's excellent. And the stats show us that. Michigan gives up 93 rush yards per game. That's 9th in the country. Washington only runs it for 124 yards per game. That's 102nd in the country. Dylan Johnson, the lead Washington back, 21 carries, 49 yards, 2 touchdowns against Michigan. Like, just there wasn't much there. Now, Dylan Johnson's been battling a foot injury for months. He came out late, very memorably, like kind of messed up the clock situation, came out late in the Texas game. But Washington has already said this week that they expect him to play, that it was sort of just like an ongoing, I don't even know that it was a re-aggravation. It's just like he has a sore foot and it gets more sore over the course of a game. You know, you get twisted a certain way, you plan a certain way, you get hit, and that happens. And so he's going to start and he's going to go. And there's almost a part of me that thinks if they lose Dylan Johnson and they just stop running, that might be better, because they couldn't run against Texas, and I don't think they're going to be able to run against Michigan. Dylan Johnson, again, just like nothing, like average less than 2 yards per carry against Texas. Overall, Washington against Texas, 31 carries, 102 yards. The most success they had was with Penix on those 3 runs, where he carried 3 times for 31 yards. I think Washington maybe should get closer to a 70-30 pass run split in this game. We've talked a lot about their splits. I like them when they're 60-40. They were about 55% pass, 45% run against Texas. For the season, I think they're more like 57% throw, 43% run. I just think they shouldn't waste a lot of time here trying to run the ball. So I would creep this up towards 60, 65, 70. And that just means, again, like you can do bubble screens to your receivers that really coaches view that as an extension of your run game. You can throw screens, you can run RPOs. A lot of coaches think about that as their run game, but it shows up in the stats of the pass game as the simple thing for simpletons like us. And so I'd like that to be closer to 70, because they have been effective at times running the ball. But Dylan Johnson this year, in the games where he had at least 10 carries, and he started off the year not getting the ball that much by the end of the year, he's a workhorse. His yards per carry, 6.6, 5.7, 5.0, 4.7, 9.8, 4.5, 5.6, 3.9, 5.4, and then 2.3 versus Texas. Their 2 toughest games before Texas, Oregon, he went 20 for 100 in the regular season. He went 28 for 152 in the Pac-12 championship game. And I said going into the semifinal, I said, I think Oregon's better than Texas, but not at that. So Texas was the best run defense that Washington had faced, and now I think Michigan's the best run defense that Washington has faced. And like it's just like it's not going to work. Michigan has allowed 8 runs of 20 yards or more this season. That's tied for 11th in the Power 5. That's pretty darn good. Washington only has 12 runs of 20 yards or more this season. That's 96th in the nation. So listen, like Washington's not going to get anything done here. I like success rate. Success rate stat that we cite, a lot of people cite often. It's just sort of like down after down. How often do you do what you need to do? Do you have success? All that is based on what's the threshold for success on first down, second down, third down, depending how much yardage you need to get. Michigan has the second best defense in the Power 5 in terms of they have the lowest success rate for their opponents, right? They do not allow their opponents very much success running the ball. So I think the key here is to not do it. It's the thing that I've said about Ohio State's offense over many parts of the last several years, especially last year for Ohio State. But like, if you can't do it, why keep trying? And I think like the idea of keeping a defense honest, I think you can do that with working some of the receivers into the run game a little bit, little jet sweep action. I think you can throw screens. I think you can throw bubble screens to receivers. I think you can work Michael Penix. And if he ran it 3 times against Texas, maybe he runs it 5 or 6 against Michigan. I would not run the tailback. So can we wipe out this part of the game? Because Michigan is so good at it. And it's really a waste of time. I think we saw it early. Washington had a series early where they got stopped on downs because on 3rd down and 4th down, they tried to slam into the Texas defensive line and it didn't work. And like, they can't afford that in this game. They can't afford to give up points because they're being stubborn. So I do want to talk about red zone as part of this Washington rushing discussion, because this is where the red zone is where the rushing really shows up sometimes, because there are often really good passing offenses that have a little bit of trouble in the red zone, especially if your quarterback is not involved in the run game. So the back of the end zone becomes a 12th defender. Defenses can just kind of line up guys on the goal line, and it makes it much more difficult. I've talked about this a lot with Ohio State over the years, especially in 2021 when Ohio State was really having trouble running the ball. A lot of injuries at running back, ineffective in the red zone. I was like, just like don't like stop at the 22 and keep chucking it in the end zone from there. Don't get inside the 20. So Michigan this year defensively is excellent at holding teams out of the end zone once they get to the red zone. And all that matters, sometimes you'll see on a TV broadcast, I thought in bowl season, there was a TV broadcast that was referencing like a team scoring like 50 out of 50 times in the red zone. It's not how often you score, it's how often you score touchdowns, because I don't know if you know, but there's a big difference in the number of points you get between a field goal and a touchdown. So if people are citing how the number of times a team scores in the red zone, that's meaningless. It's touchdown percentage, or its average number of points per red zone trip. That's what really matters. So touchdown percentage in the red zone. Michigan allows opponents to score touchdowns only 44% of the time in the red zone. And actually, Michigan had not allowed a whole bunch of red zone trips this year at all. So that is really good to allow only that number of red zone trips and that number of scores. Michigan, 23 red zone trips for opponents this year, 10 touchdowns, 6 field goals. So Washington is okay, but they're so high in so many offensive statistics. They are 27th in the nation in how often they score touchdowns in the red zone. They're at 68%. So if Michigan can get a couple red zone stops, and you did see this a little bit in the semifinal, there were, I think, 4 red zone trips for Washington against Texas, and they did get held to, I think they scored 1 touchdown, 2 field goals, and they got stopped on downs once. So some of those field goals in the second half really mattered in that Texas game. If Washington would have scored touchdowns, I think they wound up kicking, I think, a field goal from the 9 and a field goal maybe from the 10. If those are touchdowns, that game's a blowout. So if Michigan can force Washington to kick a couple field goals, meanwhile, on the other side, Washington's defense is terrible in the red zone. They let opponents score touchdowns 70% of the time. And Michigan scores touchdowns in the red zone 73% of the time. So red zone touchdown defense for Washington, 117th in the country. Red zone touchdown offense for Michigan, 16th in the country. So Michigan's better on both sides. In the red zone, Michigan's better on both sides. Better offensively, better defensively. This is huge. And this ties into the run game. Why is Michigan better offensively in the red zone? Because they run the ball. Why is Washington not as good in the red zone? Because they don't run the ball. So Washington's going to have a plan to cash in, because that is absolutely an off-ramp. That's a frontage road. Okay, we're driving down the highway, and then what happens? Washington gets in the red zone 7 times, only scores 3 touchdowns, kicks 2 field goals, and gets stopped on downs twice. That's a formula for a Michigan win. Not that they stop Washington, not that you stop Michael Penix, not that Michael Penix doesn't have 390 passing yards, but that they don't turn it into 7. That's a very real consideration in this game. So keep that in mind. That's tied to how Washington runs the ball and how much better Michigan runs the ball in the red zone is really going to matter. Okay, we're going to flip it. We're going to get to the other side of things. When we come back, we'll talk about the Michigan pass game. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. All right, we're going to talk about the Michigan pass game. This is not going to be long, because I don't know how much this matters, because J.J. McCarthy made a terrible throw on the first game of the semifinal that was picked off, was overruled because Caleb Downs' heel was out of bounds. But Michigan just needs to make sure the pass game doesn't ruin them. So it's just fascinating to look at J.J. McCarthy. I'll just run through it quick. I think you guys know this to some extent. But his passing yards by game, right? East Carolina comes out, throws for 280 in the openers, 26 of 30 for 280, 3 touchdowns, no picks, in a 30-3 win over East Carolina in the opener. It's like, here it is. This is the new version of elevate the offense, J.J. McCarthy, and we're off to the races, you think. 278 versus UNLV. Then he has his worst game of the year. This is unbelievable. This is a quarterback of a team in the national championship game against Bowling Green. He was 8 of 13, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks. Threw 3 picks against Bowling Green. 143. Then 214, 156, 219, 222, 287, 335 against Purdue. This is as the sign stealing allegations and investigations are coming out, right? It's first against Michigan State. It really is bubbling up against Purdue. Michigan wants to show like, hey, it's not about the sign stealing. We can go out and do stuff. So they drop 41 on Purdue. They throw for 335. Then Jim Harbaugh gets suspended. Sharon Moore is trying to be the head coach and the offensive coordinator. They throw for 60 yards against Penn State. He throws for 141 against Maryland, 148 against Ohio State, 147 against Iowa, and then 17 of 27 for 221, 3 touchdowns against Alabama. So again, the last 4 Big Ten games, 60, 141, 148, 147. J.J. McCarthy had 4 games this year where he threw for more than 250 yards, and 2 of them were the first 2 games of the year. So like it just doesn't matter that much. Michigan throws for 219 yards per game overall. That's 73rd in the nation. And the Washington pass defense is bad. 267, 123rd in the nation. Again, the raw stats are bad. We talked about this in the semifinal, like the inside the numbers, the efficiency metrics, those kind of things. They're more like middle of the pack than they are at the bottom. I don't know. I don't think Michigan's going to win throwing the ball. I do think Washington should take lessons from what Ohio State did poorly against Michigan in 2022 with, I thought they over blitzed. J.J. McCarthy this year got blitzed 36% of the time. I don't think you need to blitz him more than that. He does have wheels. He can get out of there a little bit. So he's not a guy that's just going to take a sack. And so I think there's some comparisons between Quinn Ewers and J.J. McCarthy, like in that they have ability, but they're probably not going to win the game on your own. Quinn Ewers is a little bit, I think maybe more significantly more of a threat to hit you with some downfield stuff. But I think this is a pretty short conversation because I just think it's going to be in the range it's been all year for Michigan. It's been a winning formula. And so there would have been a time where I would have thought that like J.J. McCarthy's got to make some huge plays. I don't think that's the case. I think he just has to make sure he doesn't make some mistakes. And even the fact that his best throw of the game, the game-changing throw on the final game-tying touchdown drive is tipped at the line, right? He had multiple passes tipped. So this is a huge thing for Washington, which is why it sort of has continued that like, Quinn Ewers is good, J.J. McCarthy is good, but they did beat Bo Nix twice. But this is kind of often the case, right? I mean, it's like it's your reflection in the mirror is like you project onto the world what you see in yourself. Washington's pass defense would not want to face Michael Penix. And so they've gotten through this season without having to face Michael Penix. They're not facing Bryce Young. They're not facing Trevor Lawrence. They're not facing CJ Stroud. Like they haven't had to do this. Listen, Bo Nix is pretty good. I voted Bo Nix second on my Heisman ballot, and they managed to beat him. So twice. So I think not to be too obvious. Listen, man, I'm not a coach. You guys know this. I'm trying to be interesting. We got stats. We got opinions. I'm not a coach. And here's the thing, by the way. Here's the little secret. You read the stuff and I like it. I like when the reporters go out and get it. You get all this inside stuff from anonymous coaches. Their inside stuff from anonymous coaches pick Texas and Bama. So what do the anonymous coaches know? I think sometimes they get in their own head about stuff. And so I think there's some pretty obvious stuff here, which is this game is about Washington throwing the ball and Michigan running the ball. So we don't even need to take a break, Mike. We'll flip to Michigan running the ball right now because this is a much more interesting conversation, this Michigan running attack versus the rush defense for Washington. And Washington, just again, success rate in how often they sort of let opposing offenses do what they want to do running the ball. Washington has one of the worst run defense success rates in the Power 5. Like they kind of let teams run on you. So Michigan, 160 yards per game. It's not like dominant. They're not the Air Force Academy, and they're not even what Michigan had maybe been the last 2 years. But they are efficient, often efficient enough. Run defense, Washington gives up 137 yards a game. That's 1/3. That's 43rd in the country. So again, Washington's run defense by raw stats is actually ranked higher than Michigan's rushing offense. But I don't think that's reflective of what matters in the game. Blake Corum, 19 carries, 83 yards, a touchdown. Also had 2 catches for 35 yards and a touchdown against Alabama. Blake Corum, hugely important in that. I do think one of the things that's going to be important in this, and this is going to be about Michigan being a bit of a machine. Washington is much more explosive. Michigan is more of a machine on both sides of the ball. I don't think Michigan can afford lulls in this game. And that means their run game is going to have to be consistent for 60 minutes. I don't think this will work against Washington because of the pressure that Washington can offensively put on anybody. This is what Michigan did on its drives against against Alabama in the semifinals. Punt, touchdown, punt, touchdown. Punt, missed field goal, touchdown. That's kind of rough. 6 punts, a missed field goal, and 3 touchdowns for Michigan. They were effective in the red zone. They only got in the red zone twice, and they cashed in both times against Alabama. That really mattered. 4.4 yards per carry. I think actually what's what Washington gives up. It's really more about Michigan sustaining something offensively over the course of the game. Because I do think the worst case scenario for Michigan is Michigan hits an offensive lull, which it certainly has been capable of doing at times this year. Washington takes advantage of the offensive lull. Washington builds a lead, and now the game is on J.J. McCarthy. And I don't think that's a winning formula for Michigan. So as much as Michigan by the numbers has been pretty effective and consistent offensively, they do only average 4.3 yards per carry. That's 72nd in the nation. I think Blake Corum has to be pretty great in this game. And again, it's not about explosiveness, but they can't get in a hole. And I think what they were able to do against Alabama, where Michigan starts off the second half with 3 straight punts, but like Alabama, because its offense isn't as consistent, isn't capable of pulling away. I think Washington pulls away in a similar scenario. So that's bad. That's a bad formula for Michigan. They have to run it all night. 4.3 yards per carry, 72nd in the country. They have to run it more like they ran it in 2022 and 2021. When in 2022, they averaged 5.6 yards per carry with the Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum combination. And in 2021, when they had Hassan Haskins had a hammer, and Blake Corum as that great kind of like number 2 back, they averaged 5.2 yards per carry. I do think you have to see the best of the Michigan run game, and it hasn't been that all year. And as much as we've talked about that they believe 7 NFL offensive linemen, I do think this is where they miss Zach Zinter, again, their injured guard. They have to dominate in the run game, and I think they can. Because I do think in terms of like what you're stacking up on the defensive line, I think Washington's probably 4th of the playoff teams, right? I think Texas and Michigan are best at interior defensive line. Bama's right there. And then I think Washington is 4th. But if Michigan comes out and is doing some 3-and-outs early, that's a huge problem. And time of possession, I do think, again, it's a function of the run game stuff a little bit. Michigan is 13th in the nation in time of possession. Washington is 65th in the nation of time of possession. I do think time of possession does not matter as much as it once did because Washington wants to score fast. Washington wants to be explosive. That's actually not a terrible time of possession for Washington for the way they play. But I do think Michigan needs to grind it out. I think Michigan needs at least two 6-minute drives, 6-minute scoring drives, preferably 6-minute touchdown drives where you keep Washington off the field and where you build some confidence for Michigan. So I do think in the end, when I'm saying that the game comes down to Washington throwing the ball and Michigan running the ball, I think there's a way for Washington. I think Washington will throw the ball, but there's still a way for Michigan to win if Washington does throw it. So I think Washington throwing it is a guarantee, but I don't think it guarantees victory. I don't think Michigan running it at a super high level is a guarantee, but I maybe think if Michigan does run it at a super high level, it guarantees victory. You know what I'm saying? One is sure to happen, but not sure to ensure a win. The other is not sure to happen, but if it does happen, it will mean a win. So I do think that's my sort of both sides of the ball breakdown of this. And Mike, will keep rolling into our intangibles and the two head coaches and everything that goes into this here. And I do want to talk about special teams a little bit as we get into coaches and things other than offense and defense. And the special teams thing is this: don't drop punts. Don't drop punts. Michigan muffed 2 punts against Alabama. Washington muffed 1 punt against Texas. Michigan got the 1 back on the 1-yard line, which was huge. If they don't get that back, they might lose the game. But they each lost a punt that directly led to a short field touchdown for the opposition. According to PFF, that was Washington's only muffed punt of the year. This has not been a season-long problem, and it cost them 7 points in the playoff semifinal, and they survive it. Michigan, according to PFF, had 2 muffed punts coming into the semifinal. They muffed 2 in the semifinal. So again, they had a little more problem than Washington did, but that's terrible. So this is one of those things that happens. We love this. We love the sport. And isn't it fun? I mean, I do. I love talking about what you think is going to happen. And actually, one of the things I love doing is going back and listening after the fact to the pregame talk of what people thought was going to happen, then to see if whether people were right or wrong. And then you can give a tip of the cap or you can, you were wrong. I'm sure you guys have at me at times, which is fine. So it's what we want to be interesting and entertaining, and not, while we're trying to be right, sometimes we can be entertaining while we're wrong. Thank goodness for me. That's, maybe a kind of a key to how I got here, is to be entertainingly and interestingly dead wrong. But it's just an emphasis. You guys saw it. Everybody freaked out. It's a reminder. They have to catch punts. In this game, Kalen DeBoer versus Jim Harbaugh. I love the matchup. Jim Harbaugh is 60 years of age. Kalen DeBoer is 49 years of age. Jim Harbaugh is 88-25 at Michigan. Kalen DeBoer is 25-2 at Washington. The thing I like about this, these guys are both so good. And they both came at it from such different directions. Jim Harbaugh as an NFL quarterback, then at the University of San Diego as a head coach there, then Stanford, then the NFL. He comes from the NFL right down to Michigan. Prodigal son returning home to right the ship at his alma mater, and he certainly has done that. Kalen DeBoer, University of Sioux Falls, plays there as the offensive coordinator there, then becomes the head coach there. Think about Kalen DeBoer. Both these guys, they win. Harbaugh's been a head coach for 20 years. I think he's had 3 losing seasons. I think that was 1 at San Diego and his first 2 years at Stanford before he completely flipped it. But he's won at Michigan. He won with the San Francisco 49ers. He wins everywhere. Kalen DeBoer, the same thing. I think Kalen DeBoer has not had a losing season. I think he had a 3-3 year at Fresno State during the COVID year. But this guy from the University of Sioux Falls at the NAIA level, multiple-time national champion, then steps back from head coaching to become an offensive coordinator, work his way up. And now to be here at this point, Jim Harbaugh, a 7-24, winning percentage at every level as a head coach. Kalen DeBoer, a .913 winning percentage at every level as a head coach. And it's fascinating. I think in a lot of ways, Jim Harbaugh seems younger than 60. He's got a lot of energy. He's 10 years older than me. He has more energy than I do. And Kalen DeBoer, only at 49 years of age. I mean, like, aren't you curious to see, like, when Kalen DeBoer is 60, what his track record will be at that point with the kind of start that he's had at Washington? The thing I like about both these guys is I think they're both going to let it rip in this game. As much as I think special teams gaffes and that kind of thing could play a huge role, I do think trick plays, I do think going forward on fourth down, I think there are going to be absolute coaching decisions that can swing this game. So again, all the off-ramps. Here's the final analysis before we get to our picks. All the off-ramps here. Special teams mistakes absolutely can change the game. Who converts in the red zone and who doesn't? That specifically means Washington marching up and down the field and not cashing in the red zone. That absolutely is an off-ramp. A trick play or a fourth down gutsy call in a key moment. They're both capable of it. I absolutely think that can change the game. And then if it's not one of those three things, it's arguably the three best corners that Washington has faced all year. Can that pass defense for Michigan slow down Washington to some extent? And then the other side of it is, can Michigan perhaps run it better than it has at any point this season and rise up? And I do think they have to be the best version of themselves offensively to win this game. So I think there's a lot of things here. I think Michigan is more prepared to stop Washington than any Washington opponent this year. But I still think the best thing that any team does in this game is what Michael Penix and those receivers do for Washington. And so as we come down to our picks here, Bill Landis is going to check in with a pick. He is under the weather. He is not here, which is why I know you guys would rather have Bill. Everybody loves Bill. I love Bill too. I want Bill here, but you're allowed to be sick. That's also a rule in the world. So Bill Landis is going to check in with a pick for Washington. 35-28. Bill picks the Huskies to beat Michigan. Again, Michigan is the favorite in this game. Let me check the over-under on this. We'll get a total. I think this is around the right number, and there's a couple reasons why for that. One of them is that Washington has scored at least 30 points in 11 of 14 games this year. They did not do it against Arizona State when they scored 15 in a game where they didn't score an offensive touchdown, which again remains one of the weirdest games in college football this year. And then they only scored in the 20s down the stretch, which is part of, I think, why, we sort of made fun of people for doubting Washington, but they did score in the low 20s against both Oregon State and Washington State in their last two games of the regular season. And I do think that was like a reasonable thing to be like, what's up with Washington? But again, that's not who this Washington is. So they've scored more than 30 in 11 of 14. Michigan hasn't allowed anybody to score 30 this year. The most points that Michigan has given up this season, they gave up 24 to Maryland. They gave up 24 to Ohio State. And then they gave up 20 to Alabama. Those are the only three games where Michigan's even given up 20 this year. So there's a lot that works into this when you're looking at a score. It's like, man, I do think Washington probably has to score in the 30s. I don't think Washington can win this game 24-17 because I don't think Washington's defense is good enough to do that to a Michigan offense that, again, I think has been a machine much of the year. So I do think 30 might be the magic number here. And so, Mike, I did not give you my pick beforehand, but I will make my pick here. And I do this sometimes. Sometimes I break a game down. I used to do this. I used to cover baseball, Major League Baseball, back in the day. And I can remember this because the copy editors at my newspaper made fun of me. I did this matchup thing. The Cubs were playing the Braves, Chicago Cubs versus Atlanta Braves in a playoff series. And I broke down like all 5 categories or something that I had. and I gave the Braves the edge in every single category, and then I picked the Cubs to win. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. Sometimes you just think a thing." So I do think I think Michigan has more advantages in this game than Washington does. But I think Washington has the biggest advantage. And so I'm going to pick Washington. And I'm going to pick Washington 31-27. So that is hitting the magic 30-point threshold. That is, well, no, actually, Michigan's favored. Michigan's favored by 4.5. I was going to say, like, that's right on the number. It's not. Michigan's the favorite. So that's obviously taking Washington with the points. The over-under's 56. So Bill is over, and I am slightly over at a 58-point total. I don't feel, we both told you the over on Washington, Texas, which I think maybe our favorite bet of the whole semifinal. And we also thought Washington, it was crazy for Washington to be a 7-1 underdog to win the national title. 30 points, the magic number. So to if Washington scores 30, it wins. I think I'm almost at the point of like, that's enough of an analysis for me. It took us 55 minutes to get here, but we're both picking Washington. I mean, I think I'm like at 55% Washington wins, 45% Michigan wins. I thought that's about probably where I was with Michigan, Alabama. I would have said Washington, Texas was more like 80% Washington wins. I almost didn't see a path for Texas, which, they almost got their 20% on those throws in the end zone at the end. So Bill and I both picking the Washington Huskies. Guess what? We will be back with a post-game show on Monday night. That's the plan, like in the wee hours, immediately after this Northern National Championship game. And a reminder that Michigan and Nebraska shared the national title in 1997. But the last 25 years, we've had two Northern National champs, Ohio State in 2002, Ohio State in 2014. We're getting one now. So this is a big deal for Northern football. We're so excited that Kings of the North has soft launched here in this world where Northern football has risen up. We've talked about it a ton. We have a ton planned for the offseason. We want to get coaches on. We want to get players on. We want to get experts on individual Northern teams on. We want to break down. I want to do what every Northern team should be. We want to establish a standard for every Northern team so that we can go about trying to figure out who's reaching the standard, who's not reaching it, who's overachieving, who's underachieving, right? I think sometimes there can be a misperception on what a program should be. And I think one of the most important things in an era where conferences are breaking down, where divisions within conferences are going away, it's harder to define success. Now, the 12-team playoff is going to open up opportunities for a lot more teams, but there's still going to be a lot of programs that really that's not ever going to be the goal. Are you realistically thinking that? So then what are you thinking? So if you can't win your division, it's like, what are you thinking? Really, it's total number of wins. It's rivalry games. So we have to establish what success is. I want to spend a lot of the offseason doing that. We still have our all-North, All-American Kings of the North team. We did a midseason one. We're going to wind up doing a postseason one. I think we'll hand out some other Northern awards. We'll hang out our King of the North award for the best Northern player. Probably going to be Michael Penix. And then we're going to try to get, I have a whole thing about head coaches. I call it coaching origin story, where I want to talk to coaches about the pivot points in their coaching lives. And it starts with, how did you decide to be a coach? Was there another career that was battling with coaching for what you were going to do with your life? And I did this a couple years ago with Mel Tucker. And again, Mel Tucker's kind of persona non grata now. But when I worked at Cleveland.com, when the 1 year that Mel Tucker was the head coach at Colorado, I called him. He's from Cleveland, which is why I did this with him. And it wasn't for a show or a podcast. It was for a story. But I called him up and I did about a half an hour interview with him. And he's talking about, he's looking out the Rocky Mountains. Oh, what a beautiful place it is to coach in Colorado. And then he was at Michigan State the next year. But we ran through his whole career and all the stops along the way and his influences and the people who helped make him who he was. And I thought it was a really interesting way to get to know a coach a little bit. So my goal is to do that with every single Northern coach. We'll see how many we get. But that's going to be part of our offseason. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to rip the South when appropriate. And we're really going to dig in and help, I think, hopefully do things that nobody else is quite doing with Northern football. But first, we got to play a Northern National Championship game. So we'll do that on Monday night. If you did not watch our show or listen to our podcast where Bill and I together broke down how Washington and Michigan built their rosters, I think there was some good information there for how Northern teams can go about it and why the North will continue to have success and how Washington and Michigan built these two championship level teams in two very different ways. So plenty already out there for you, plenty more to come. The plan is to see you Monday night. I guess there's a tiny chance that maybe it would wind up being Tuesday morning. But like by the time you wake up Tuesday, we're going to be here having a full, hearty discussion about the national championship game, probably Monday night. So thanks for joining us here. Bill Landis, get healthy. Mike Urostowski, our producer, thanks as always for making us look good and sound good. And thanks to you guys for making Kings of the North part of your college football fandom. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.